Alright, we're ready to sew the binding on the back of our bag. And I always like to start on the back so that I can bring it over to the front and my stitching looks the best on the front. I've pinned my binding in half, I've cut a diagonal end, and I'm ready to go. Now, whenever I'm putting a binding on, I try to start where I've got the longest area, because when I get ready to join them, I want to have space to move that. Right there would be a perfect spot to join these two pieces. So I'm going to kind of align my strip there, but I'm not going to start sewing here, or I don't have room to bring that out and join it to the next strip. So I'm going to start stitching fairly far down on this, not right at a corner, but far enough that I've got some room to maneuver. So I'm going to start stitching about right in here. And I've got my raw edges of my strips lined up with the raw edges of my bag. I've got my 1/4 inch foot on. I've got my needle down position engaged because I want to make sure that every time I stop, my needle stops in the needle down position. I'm also using my little stiletto because it helps me hold my pieces in place. Now I'm ready to stitch, and I've got my machine set at about a 2 or 2.5 inch stitch length. I'm going to stitch down this side until I get to a 1/4 inch from the edge. And this is another place where my stiletto comes in handy, because I can use it to kind of hold down the edge so I know right where the edge is. Now on my 1/4 inch foot, I know that when I hit this portion of my foot against the end of my bag, from there to my needle is a 1/4 inch. So I want to stop when that's right matching the edge of my bag. So again, the stilettos kind of help me gauge where that is, and about right there is the edge of my bag. Then I'm going to turn my bag a 45-degree turn, put my feed dogs back down, or my foot back down, stitch to the edge, lift my needle up, then I'll come back and I'm going to fold this. And what I want to do is take this and fold it at a 45-degree angle, which will go right along that line of stitching that I did. Put it down and then fold it back on itself right to match the edge of the fabric. So this fold matches a straight line along there, and that puts my next piece right along the bottom edge of my bag. I'll put my feed dogs back down. I keep calling them feed dogs, it's my foot. Back down, and I'm going to stitch along here with a 1/4 inch seam all the way to the corner. And I've got 4 corners to do, so if you didn't catch it on that one, watch for the next corner. This little name tag bag makes a great class for learning how to do mitered bindings, because you don't have to make a whole quilt to practice it. So again, I'm going to stitch until I'm a 1/4 inch from the edge, which is right there. Then I'll turn my machine at a piece at a 45-degree angle, stitch to the corner, lift my presser foot, turn my piece back, fold that 45-degree, which goes right along that line of stitching, then fold it back on itself so that my raw edges are even with the side of my bag. Put it back in place and stitch back to the other edge. Now I want to be careful. Underneath here I've got my little tabs with my rectangle rings. I want to make sure that those are flat, so I just kind of check and make sure those are in place where I want them before I stitch across that part. And I go a little slower when I go over those two because I'm going over several layers. And now I'm stitching over my zipper, but my zipper pulls to the inside of my bag, so I don't have to worry about hitting that. And I'm going to come up to this one, stitch to a 1/4 inch of this edge. So again, putting my stiletto there helps me keep an eye on where that is. One more stitch. Turn it at a 45-degree angle, stitch to the edge, lift it up, fold it back on itself at a 45-degree angle, then back on itself again, Line it up even with the edge of my bag. Put my presser foot down, stitch across this end. Again, making sure that my binding is lined up with the raw edges of my bag. Alright, there's the edge of my bag, so I want to stitch to a 1/4 inch of that. Turn it to a 45-degree angle. Stitch out to the corner. Lift my presser foot. Fold my 45-degree angle. Fold it back on itself. Line the raw edges up with the raw edges of my bag. And stitch back down. Now this time I'm only going to stitch a couple inches because my next step is to join these two pieces, so I've got a seam there that is not noticeable. So I'm only going to stitch a couple inches because I want to have as much room to work there as I can.